I'm going to hand it over to our great team. A big shout out to Woodard and Curran. I know we're going to talk to the water treatment plant upgrade, a little bit about the THMs, which you've seen some issues with. I think Reggie's got a brief update. We just got our latest report back on that, which I think is somewhat good news. But really excited about this project, especially because it seems like we finally got the final piece of the funding, which we can talk about more. And but it's a huge project. I actually was going back and forth in email with Tim King, the former city manager here, who was talking about looping, and I forwarded along to Mike. And yeah, when we took this over, like there was going to be a problem with the looping, and how's that working out? And it was I forgot about that. This was a private. This wasn't even the city took over the system right at some point. So the kind of history. This feels like this is the final piece to actually modernize this water system for Ellsworth.
Well, it's been modernized. I mean, when we took it over, it wasn't out on Branch Lake. It was out at on Leonard's Lake.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's where it started, and then we built out on Branch Lake and brought it down Bucksport Road.
Gotcha. So this is really excited about this. I feel like the teams are doing everything they can with the THMs and some of those other pieces, but we're getting growing needs, and this is going to bring us into the next generation for Ellsworth. So really excited about it. And with that, I'll hand it over to Woodard.
I'm going to lead off tonight. For those who don't know me, my name is Nate McLaughlin. I am a senior technical leader at Woodard and Curran in our drinking water practice. With me tonight is Morgan Roper, who you've probably met. She's the project manager, and Brent Bridges, who you must know. Brent is the senior principal at Woodard and Curran and the principal in charge on this project. And basically, we're just giving you an update of the work we've been doing, a little bit of the history of the plant, and where we think we're headed. Morgan's gonna jump up here and help me. She's not gonna be able to handle it. Oh, got it. So our agenda tonight is we'll give a quick overview of your existing system. We're going to talk about the need for the new plant, which is really the thrust of all of this. Give you an update on the work we've done to date, both in the design side as well as the bench and pilot scale studies, some that's been done, some that's proposed to be done. Brent's going to walk you through the funding, how we intend to pay for this work, and then go through next steps and where we're headed from here. So to orientate everybody quickly, your existing system, so you're sort of on the southwest corner of Branch Lake in an area of the lake that is pretty well undeveloped or sparsely developed, thanks in large part to the conservation easement the city obtained 2010, maybe, around that vintage?
Yeah, somewhere between 10 and 15, I can't remember.
And the assets out there consist of an intake structure about 150 feet off the shore, your treatment building, your backwash lagoons, and that's pretty much it. We'll get into what all of those are, their function, and talk a little bit about what's being upgraded. This facility was constructed in 1990, and your total capacity out there is about 870,000 gallons per day. There's a lot here, but just to kind of quickly go through it, water comes in from the lake. You have 2 raw water pumps. Those are in the building. You pre-treat with a coagulant, which aids in your clarification and filtration process. You have ultraviolet light primary disinfection. You add fluoride, chlorine for a system residual, and then adjust pH for corrosion control before the water goes out to distribution through a series of tanks, ultimately before it comes into town. The backwash process, which we'll get into in much more detail, it consists of a holding tank and 2 lagoons. You store backwash on site because you're about 7 miles from sewer collection. So on-site management of backwash will be an important consideration of this project moving forward. And stop me at any time. I'd rather talk to you talk with you than talk to you. So, you need for the new project, you have everything going on out there from deterioration of the existing structure. We'll show some pictures of that in a moment. Pretty poor ventilation system, which is leading to much of that deterioration. You have some confined space concerns, particularly with your raw water pumps, and if you have to replace or maintain those raw water pumps, which we've had to do very recently. The lagoons are undersized. We're going to get into that in more detail. That's leading to one of the compliance issues you have at the site, which is you have an unpermitted discharge from those lagoons back into Branch Lake. And then as of late, and Charlie mentioned this, we've had rising disinfection byproduct levels. So we've exceeded the maximum contaminant limit, that's the MCL. And Morgan will get into that in a little bit more detail. The other primary need for the facility is to just support the growth in the community. The lack of reliability out there currently is a pretty big concern, I know, for you all, and just supporting the growth you want to see here in the community. A little bit just about existing plant conditions to just kind of drive the point home. You have everything from spalled concrete, the significant corrosion you see on the door there is largely due in part to the inadequate ventilation in the structure. The same chemicals in the atmosphere that's corroding that door is doing things like making light switches not work and causing problems with the electrical system. It's deteriorating most of the coatings in the building, so paint coatings are there to protect what's underneath it. You lose the paint coating, you start to deteriorate the material underneath. The filters are starting to see leaks in them. Most of the piping is leaking out there. Just a building that's pretty tired at this point. So to talk about the lagoons for a second, I looked back in my email before coming here today. The first email I had on the lagoons was 2010. So that's kind of when I started thinking about these lagoons. When the facility was first designed and constructed, the plan was to recycle 100% of the backwash. The way the system works is just quickly, you're filtering the water from Branch Lake. When those filters start to become clogged, you backwash them to clean them. That backwash water goes to these lagoons. The plan was to settle that water in the lagoons and then recycle that water, 100% of it, back through forward flow of the plant. A couple of things have occurred over the years that have challenged that approach. One is the filter backwash rule, which limits the amount you can recycle through the plant to, I think it's 10%, but I might have that wrong. The other thing that's challenging you is the promulgation of the enhanced surface water treatment rule, the disinfection byproduct rule. Those all require much more optimized removal of pathogens, which means you're backwashing more frequently. And ultimately what it's led to is the lagoons, as they're sized, cannot handle that volume of water. So the lagoons fill, they saturate the area, and in this corner here, we're seeing pretty much a steady stream of water flowing back down to Branch Lake. Branch Lake is a Class A water body. You cannot permit a discharge to it. So that is the unpermitted discharge. DEP is aware. We've been at this with them for a number of years. They're not threatening any sort of action, but it is a problem that they're aware of and they would like to see the city address. So, just to put it in greater context, so like an adequately sized and operated lagoon system would be much bigger. So we would envision 2 lagoons, much bigger than what's there now. One to receive backwash water and to be the source of which you discharge to your spray irrigation system, which is also planned as part of this. And then a lagoon to basically treat the residuals that have gone in over the course of the year. You let that go through a freeze-thaw cycle, and then that lagoon sits empty for one winter while the other lagoon is receiving water, and then you alternate each year. So it would look very different than what's there now, but that's what an adequate lagoon system would look like. And we'll get into that a little bit more also when we're talking about the cost estimate. I think this is where Morgan takes over. But before I leave, is there any questions for me about any of that?
Is there enough room out there to have two very large lagoons? Do we have enough land?
Yeah, so several years ago, we went through a process with the Frenchman's Bay folks where we did a land swap. So we took some land out of what was in the original conservation easement, traded them some land that we didn't need for this project. So we, at this point, feel we have adequate land for both the lagoon construction and the spray irrigation system.
Thanks.
The sort of overflow, the overage from what the lagoon is meant to handle, how much of that is comes from growth of the city versus change in regulations, like you mentioned, the percentage recycle rate?
Good question. So, the more water you treat, the more frequently you would need to backwash. So the closer you get to the permitted capacity of the facility, the more you'll be backwashing, the more those lagoons will have to receive water. So I don't have like a quantitative answer, but the answer to your question is yes. With growth in the city, that problem gets worse. You'll enjoy listening to Morgan speak much better than me.
All right, so I'm going to take over in an area that I know has been the top of the city's mind for quite a while when it comes to drinking water, which is disinfection byproducts. So when we hear disinfection byproducts, there's two main categories of those. So the THMs that you hear about a lot, which is total trihalomethanes, and then also HAAs, which are less of a problem in Ellsworth, and what's formed is really dependent on what's in your source water. So DBPs are formed. There's really three things you need to make DBPs, and the first one is organic material. So as you're taking water out of Branch Lake and filtering it, there's still some organic material that's in there. The second item is some sort of disinfectant. So in your case, chlorine is the disinfectant there. And then the third thing that's not shown here but is a factor is time. So that's why you typically see your DBP issues sort of at the extent of your system, where that water with the chlorine and the organics has been sitting together for the longest period of time. So the reason that we care about DBPs, the EPA, I think since the early 90s, has been sort of watching these chemicals and regulating them. They're public health hazards and probable carcinogens is how they're labeled. So that's the reason why we care about DBPs. So the limits that EPA has set for DBPs, for those HAAs, it's 60 parts per billion, and THMs, it's 80 parts per billion. The way that those are measured is the city has two locations that they need to sample from 4 times a year. So it's a quarterly sample, and you take the running annual average for each location. So the sum of the past 4 quarters divided by 4 is the number that you're comparing to those limits. So what that means is that you could have a result that was higher than the 80 parts per billion, but as long as the rest of the year you were below that, you would still maintain your compliance limit. So that's just what that running annual average does for you. So the city of Ellsworth typically sees their highest values in the fall and the spring. The reason behind that is that's when organics are highest in the water. Branch Lake goes through a turnover during those periods as the temperatures change and things get mixed up. So you're pulling in more organics into the plant, and that's really feeding the DBP formation. So these graphs show the results since back to 2016. So the dots are going to be the individual results, and the gray lines are going to be that running annual average. And the red line is going to be the EPA limit. So you can see that specifically at 368 High Street, which is one of your 2 locations for monitoring, it's sort of been a continuous issue or close to an issue for quite some time. Now, the city has done a lot since then to try to address this problem. So way back in 2009, the city replaced the clarifier and filter media. So again, the goal of that is to reduce the organic matter that's going into that equation. In 2013, the city installed UV disinfection. And so before that time, they were using chlorine as the primary disinfectant. And so it required a lot more chlorine to be added at the plant. When they installed UV, it allowed them to cut back on that chlorine dose, just using it to maintain a residual in the distribution system. So now we're lowering that chlorine component of the equation. And then in 2020, the city installed chlorination at the High Street water tank and the State Street or the high school water tank. So what that helps with is to cut back on the time part of that equation, because we can now dose less chlorine at the plant and add it at the tanks instead, so we're still maintaining the necessary residual that we need to prevent viruses and all those bad things from forming, but without all the time of having that sit in there right from the plant. The other part of that was adding mixers, which also helps reduce that water age and prevents stagnation in the tanks that can also lead to issues. The city has also been, working with the filters that they have and the capacity that they can to try to maximize and optimize how much they're removing, but they're limited with the infrastructure that they have now. So long story short is that the city has done a lot of work to try to reduce the different factors that go into the DBP formation, and but with the state of the plant and everything else that's going on, it's really the filters need to be a more robust, more well-suited material to treat the water in Branch Lake, to reduce the organic material. We've sort of done what we can with the chlorine, and the age you don't have too much control over, but really reducing that organics is going to be what's critical to getting back in compliance for that. All right, so now we'll talk a little bit about growth. So this chart, the blue lines are just your daily flow from 2021 to 2024. And the orange line there is what the current max capacity of your plant is. So you can see there's been one instance where you exceeded that, so things were running higher than they should have been, and again, your filters were running at a rate that's higher than what they're rated for. And there are several points where we're close to that point. The other thing I just want to note is when we talk about plant capacity, and we say 870,000 gallons, that's with everything running. So when we design a new plant, we like to build in some redundancy to that so that your equipment, you can have a pump down and still be able to meet your maximum demands. Or you could take a filter down for maintenance and you're not worried about meeting the demands of your customers. So that 870,000 is with everything running. So you also have a layer of sort of vulnerability there. Your average day flow for the past 4 years has been 483,000 gallons, but you can somewhat see on this chart that that is trending upwards. That's a combination of just growth in the city, additional demands from Jackson Lab, so several factors there, but there is definitely a trend upward in your average and max demands. So on here, the blue line, currently what we are working with, which back in 2022, we had worked with city staff to look at what development is upcoming, just what was known, make some predictions around things we don't know. And that landed us in about a 1.3 million gallon per day facility, which is about a 50% increase from the current facility size. That is something that as we move forward in the design process, we'll certainly want to reevaluate with the city, and that's a part of those conversations. But just to show the idea of where we're at is about a 50% increase over current capacity. All right, so getting into what Nate was discussing a little bit in the proposed layout. So one thing that we need to keep in consideration is the current plant needs to operate throughout construction of a new plant, because that's your sole source of water here. So leaving that building as it is and constructing a new treatment facility on the existing property, but a little bit further up is what we're envisioning on the driveway in a cleared area. And the lagoons and spray irrigation fields that are outlined in white here are the areas Nate was referring to that were, they're in they were taken out of the conservation easement to allow for this project to move forward several years ago. Okay, so now I'll just talk a little bit, I'm actually gonna skip that one for now, sorry. Okay, so getting into the work that's been done so far, back in July of last year, we worked with Reggie and his team to complete a bench scale study of the existing water. And the goal of this was to look at different coagulants, different chemicals that we can add that would help us improve the organics removal. So when we look at that, we're looking at which chemicals are binding that organic material into bigger blobs that are easier to remove. So we worked with a piloting subcontractor out of Massachusetts to do this work, and they evaluated 4 different chemical coagulants and one process that's called MIEX, which is more of an adsorption process. It's a little bit different. Of those 4 coagulants, we looked at 1 iron-based one, which is ferric chloride, and 3 aluminum-based ones, including the one that the city currently uses. There's a lot of words on here, but to summarize, the ferric chloride is really what showed the most potential. The most organics removal, the lowest DBP formation potential, which is something that they can measure, and just performed really well in the water. So that was really valuable data for us, as it's a pretty significant change from what the city's currently doing, but as we move forward into what sort of treatment processes we're going to be looking at for the new plant, a very good data point. So that bench scale testing involved us sending water that the city had collected to a lab where they added these chemicals and tracked these things. And the next stage of this is piloting. So that would involve bringing the treatment components that we envision for the new plant to the site, running the actual city water through it with the right chemicals on a smaller scale, so we can measure exactly how it's going to perform with the water. So after looking at the results of the bench scale study, and we've been sampling and tracking water quality from Branch Lake for about 2 years now, we've developed some proposed treatment trains that we're looking to pilot. So the first step of that is the chemical feed. So we're looking at the top 2 coagulants from that bench scale study, which one of them is the aluminum-based and one of them is the ferric chloride, as well as pH adjustment to get the water within the optimal pH range for those chemicals. The next one is sedimentation with inclined plate settlers. So this process is, as we've formed these blobs of organics, now we're going to let them settle out. By doing that on inclined plate settlers, we can minimize the footprint that we need because we're maximizing surface area over footprint. And it's just a very effective way at getting out some of those larger components. And then we move into filtration, which takes care of the rest that doesn't settle out. And we're looking at, right now the city utilizes pressure filtration vessels, which are closed vessels, and we're looking at more of an open filtration, or an open filter, which gives you a much more robust removal. So 2 different medias for that. One is a sand and anthracite, and one is a sand and GAC, which a lot of people know right now from the PFAS world, which Branch Lake does not have a PFAS problem, but GAC certainly gives you an additional removal component for things we might not even know about yet. So this just shows what I described in more of a flow diagram. All right, before I turn it over to Brent for funding, if anybody has any questions about all that fun technical stuff, I'd be happy to take them.
I have questions.
Yeah.
Okay, have we seen an increase in the turbidity of the lake, the solids in the water body itself? Has it been increasing over time, or is it like pretty standard for lakes of its kind?
I would say for its season, it changes year to year, which, Reggie, if you have any sort of thoughts, but I know this summer I don't think was a terrible one.
No, so the turbidity levels in the lake when they come into the plant have all been maintaining a 0.3. I mean, that's been the max, but we're backwashing a lot more.
Because I just wonder if we've seen an increase in that with development around the lake. The follow-up would be, is there anything upstream of the lake like non-point source pollution control on Lake Shore that could help as well? That might be just
I mean,
something.
I was just gonna say before, one of the things we've seen, not even just in Ellsworth, but throughout this region, is more so to do with the climate patterns that we're seeing. So the really heavy, really dry spells and then heavy rains really impacts that turbidity and water quality in lakes throughout Maine.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was 2 summers ago, everybody in this area, Bangor, Brewer, you folks, were all suffering with really strange water quality events, largely all tied to heavy rain events following periods of dry weather. So those plague you. If those increase, they'll plague you more. I think one thing the city does really good at is out in your watershed. The city has a watershed steward, John Wheaton, I believe, is still the watershed steward. So, he's doing a lot of work with camp owners and guys that are cutting, and we go out with John yearly, maintain trails out there. It's one of the funner things, more fun things we get to do. I think you're managing your watershed really well.
And Mike, Winklepaw is on our local roads for this,
Yep.
the paving, so we're also doing,
Happy Town.
Happy Town.
Town, we can call it 4 Points.
So there's a piece, we worked with the Branch Lake Watershed Association, and had been kind of on the list. There's just kind of one piece next to that stream where it's dirt, and it kind of, you can just see the water, and it's been pluming a bit, so I don't, you can't necessarily do 1-to-1, but we're also gonna hope to pave that area and limit that, that soil erosion in there.
The irrigation fields,
Yes.
can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. So where Nate was talking about the lagoons and then recycling that water, so instead of recycling it or discharging it somewhere, that process essentially uses a series of hoses and sprinkler heads to spread that water across a cleared field. Not completely cleared, they leave some trees selectively, but so that only happens when the ground is not frozen. And the thought there is that the filtration down through the ground and back into the aquifer below provides the treatment that's necessary to remove anything that's in there.
And it's currently permanent. So we started in on that project, I think, in 15, and paused it, knowing that this was coming, so this could all be done at once. But we did get as far as obtaining the what's known as the NIPDES discharge permit, very similar to the permit you have from your wastewater plant. But so that is permitted, and I believe we even renewed it.
We did, yeah, we renewed it, the 5-year renewal without having used it, but,
But once you have it, it's best to just keep it.
It's pretty common. I've run those. And it's just, for places where you either can't discharge into a water body. So Ellsworth is fortunate our wastewater treatment plant can discharge to, for places that are not close to a large water body or something like that. Like, I'll tell you, the place that's doing it, I think, is Bridgeton. Is Bridgeton's for irrigation?
they have a
were
drip
looking at it.
dispersal.
Drip dispersal.
Yeah.
So,
Canada, main water.
Yeah.
Canada water does it.
So, it just lets the ground do its job, which it would do in any leach field or something like that, or just naturally filters and stuff.
Cool.
It's Branch Lake water.
And in the same way that Mike has to do before he can discharge water to the river, there are sampling requirements and reporting requirements to make sure that nothing is
So you know what you're putting on
harming.
there.
Yes, exactly.
The ferric chloride
Yes.
or other finding agent, filtration agents?
Yep.
Matriculating, whatever they are they reusable or do they?
No,
They're
they're
tossed
disposable. Yeah. So you just add those, and then as we talk about the lagoons and things, the chemicals that are in those are actually the primary contaminants that we're looking to deal with. So aluminum is the case now because of the coagulant that they're using, and iron would be in the future if the switch was to ferric chloride.
Yeah, I've used those before too. So ferric chloride is fairly aggressive chemical. But it does well, like probably, a lot of wastewater places use it with phosphorus, so it probably has some effects there. And There's phosphorus and nitrogen are the big nutrients that you worry about getting into your water supply. High levels of nitrogen, high levels of phosphorus, can't have it. That's why there's no phosphorus in laundry detergents anymore and things like that. The ferric chloride is one of the main chemicals for coagulant and also one of the main chemicals for phosphorus. So it'll have a dual benefit.
Your coagulant will be bound in your organic material, that's what will be backwashed, that's what will go in the new adequately sized lagoons, that's what will settle to the bottom, and after we let those lagoons drain for a season, we go through a freeze-thaw cycle, that's what you'll then go in next year and remove with it, or possibly several years, depending on how quickly it builds up with a skid steer or a motor.
To clean it.
That becomes the waste
Ah,
product
okay.
of the process.
And eventually that gets taken.
Storage.
Okay.
All right.
That stuff is,
It's
it
fascinating.
is fascinating.
We got a question in the audience?
Yeah.
Oh, right, I'm sorry.
I would just like to comment that I'm very glad to hear that there is no PFAS problem with Branch Lake. And there's a reason why there isn't. 40 years ago, there was a proposal to spread sludge east of Branch Lake on higher ground, which the city council initially approved, but then reconsidered and denied it. So this is a good sign that there hasn't been any sludge spreading affecting Branch Lake. But are you finding much sludge in your sewage disposal stuff or PFAS stuff?
Actually, for Ellsworth, no. And so, I don't want to get off topic too much, but yeah, so they passed a law that wouldn't allow us to compost. We were testing for PFAS.
Okay,
And I was on the legislative team that was kind of battling that law.
Okay, I don't really concern about it.
Yeah,
But
and we were low.
I'm glad to hear that there isn't a PFAS problem
Yeah.
regarding Branch Lake water. And you test for that, and I think I tried to go on the system a couple of months ago and read it, but I didn't find where you were PFAS testing.
All
But it doesn't-
utilities had to do the test for PFAS
Okay,
last
but
year.
so there's nothing there, so that's good.
We have to do it again next year.
You said we had nothing for PFAS?
I believe it was no detect.
It's extremely, extremely low.
We should put that in the front page of the website. Come to Elfers, no
Yeah, I
PFAS.
mean, the result would be probably in your.
I can send you.
Yeah, it was, I mean, the regulation is what, for PPT?
Parts per trillion.
Yeah, so.
Parts per
you're-
trillion,
you're-
so.
You're
Oh, that's it.
below that.
That's great.
All right. Turn it over to Brent. Thank you.
Thanks.
This is the less than exciting part. This is how you pay for it. So one thing, as you go through this, Ellsworth is very fortunate because you are the center of attention. And so that's a really good thing because a lot of the funders look at you as a place to invest. And so that's always good. And so when you have a big project like this, it takes a little while to accumulate the money. And so what you're seeing here is how you've been accumulating money towards this project for a while. And so back in 2022, the drinking water program gave you $300,000 to start the process of all the work we've been doing up to now, this preliminary work, to be able to define the project, how we're gonna go about it. And what their thought was, if they could have you kind of advance the ball a little bit, you'd be in better position to submit for more funding in the future. And so that came in the form of a grant that we've been using for the last couple of years to do all of the work up to date. In 2024, you submitted an application to be able to get some funding. And the most that they could give you was $6 million. There's a lot of demands on their system, but they kind of capped you off and said, well, we'll give you $6 million of 3.9 loan and 2.1 grant to help build this project. And so that was 2024. 2025, you recently just got notified that you're at the top of the list, and you got another 3.9 and 2.1 in loan and grant money, which leaves you a little bit short in your overall project. But what we say is funding is intimidated. The drinking water program is very invested in you and very invested in Ellsworth as far as wanting to fund the project. They're a little bit capped out in that $6 million is as much as they want to give because they've got a lot of needs. And so in working with them and knowing that the project is still a ways off from being constructed, it felt like next year to kind of get that last bit of money seems like the right thing. So you've been accumulating money along the way, and you haven't spent any of this money on this yet. You just got this, you've had this for a while. It leaves you with a little bit of a balance. And so when you come right down to it, this is what your loan and grant looks like. And as we've talked before with the drinking water program, it's low interest loan. So it's 1.5%. I think they might be moving more towards 2% in the near future, but it's 1.5% money. And so it's really attractive money to be able to get, to be able to apply towards this. And so the loan part is very, it's again, good loan, and you'll go forward and do it. So that's the piece that the drinking water program has been very eyes on Ellsworth as far as wanting to support you as far as the work that's being done. And what they've said is, gotcha, 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 and we will get this next year when you put in. So this September, you'll put another application for the balance of money you need. Questions on that part? So at the meantime, we're working with Ellsworth, and so your team, I mean, it's been a team effort as far as these applications for funding. As far as it's the work that we do, the work that you do, as far as putting these things in. Over the last couple of years, so last year you also, for the water plant, you got a $2 million CDS grant, sodium water. And you also got a $1 million grant from Northern Borders. And so those are two applications you put in. Again, they support Ellsworth as much as the drinking water program supports. And so you've got $3 million towards the project. And so to be used, and what we show it is really construction money. We want to use it as construction, not for design or preliminary things. The reason we've separated it out is because either of those require a match. And so the grant that comes, the earmark that comes, requires you to come up with $500,000 of matching money or balancing money or something else to go with that $2 million. The Northern Borders, again, comes with we'll give you $1 million, you have to come up with $1 million. So, let me go back a little bit. Here, all of this money has a little bit of a string attached. A little bit of a string attached. And so, this money has all come through really clean. Really clean. It doesn't have a lot of strings attached. And there's BABA is out there, which is a Buy American, Build America. So what it does is a lot of the money that's coming forward right now has a string attached that says is all the components of your construction has to be American made. In the wastewater and the water industry, there's a lot of components that aren't American made, that are very valuable. So when you say it's American made, the cost goes up. Because that's your limitation. It can't be from any place else besides America. We're not making all those kind of things. Just because you pass a law that says you get all this money, as you know, industry's got to catch up, right? And so what happens is none of this money right here has any of that in it. So it's clean as it can be. Strange to say about a water project being clean as it can be. And this isn't dirty, but this money has BABA attached to it. So the money that you spend here is BABA money. And so it comes with a Buy American, Build America. We're separating that out, and so the reason we've done it is because we've still got a shortfall about money, a match money, but that'll all take care of itself. The one thing that we've done in our workings with, we had a meeting with the drinking water program and EPA, and again, couldn't have been a better meeting about meetings than mine, is have come to the conclusion that the best way to approach your project is that this money is going to be spent on lagoons and the water intake. It's it's the least amount of mechanical components, it's earthwork, it's stuff that the BABA stuff really doesn't hurt you. So we're gonna take all of this money that has BABA in it, the earmark and Northern Border, which is federal money, we're gonna separate the project out. That's only gonna be spent on earthwork and outfalls, stuff like that really have an impact. And what we'll do is we'll leave that money to basically work on the plant. Pumps, controls, electrical, with the stuff that's really affected by that. And so as we go forward, it's the same amount of money, we gotta separate it out a little bit, so there's two separate projects, but it really keeps you from incurring a lot of costs that would be there if you had BABA on the whole project. So, great meeting of the minds, and so I think Drinking Water Program was absolutely on board with this. EPA, very creatively on board with this as far as going forward, and so as we go forward, we'll track these as two separate projects, it's all one, but the reason we're doing some of the things in the future you'll see is because of that very thing, that we need to make sure we keep them separate so you don't overspend on the things you don't need to. Make sense? Good? How will you afford it? Well, we talked about, what you've got for current debt, and loans amounts and the payments on it and things like that. And currently, what's going on for water billing and when we talk about this is, there's an established amount of water that people use that you compare. Let's see if I do this the right way. 2,000 cubic feet per quarter is an established amount that people look at to compare. When you put an application in, people don't use 2,000 cubic feet of water. Is that the new one?
Yeah.
So what we've done is, the real number here is 8965, 12641. And so what we've said is what you really use is about 1,200 cubic feet of water. So your water rates right now are 8965 per quarter, it'll go to 126. That's a 41% increase. But how does it compare? Like we said, let's look at other water departments and what their costs are and how things are compared to make sure where you are. So you're in the middle. You won't be in the middle for long, after you do the plant. The one thing we want to emphasize on this is when we talk about your increase going from about $90 a quarter to $126 a quarter, that's if all the existing users stayed exactly the same number. You didn't use any more water. That's day one. Ellsworth is growing. And so when you say worst case would be a 41% increase in your rates, that's based on no growth. That's no new users, that's no more water. And we've seen from where you've been the last 4 years, you're continuing to use more water, get more customers, produce more revenue. And so anything you do to grow the system in its user will impact how those rates are. So that if you built this plant with no more users, you'll be paying 41% more in your quarterly rates. We know that's not going to happen to you, and so we know that we can model that out as far as what your growth has been, what your water use has been, to see what that realistic number would be. Am I making sense or am I confusing?
It's like the
That was
mill
gonna be my
rate.
next question, was
What's that?
what's our average growth been over the last 5 years? Do we know?
In
Water use?
In water usage?
In the last 4 years, it's been about 21% growth in the last 4 years.
Total over the 4 years?
Yes.
Total over 4 years. Now, that might be, somewhat influenced by Jax's build-out,
Mm.
but, I mean, you've had growth in the community, so 21% in the last 4 years has been
I mean, even to think, even if you did a 3% a year, which is clearly an easy one to achieve, what you can see is, anything you're gonna do as you build this out, more users, more bills and stuff like that, it should reduce that. But we'll do some modeling for that.
Is there a suggestion to step the increase gradually over time for the rate, the usage rate?
I think you might wanna have maybe a larger step and then kind of balance that out over time. I mean, you're allowed 1.5% or 2% average, right? 1.5%. you can do 1.5% without going to the PUC. And so what I would suggest is get it to the point that you think you can cover your debt, and then make sure you do those 1.5% on a yearly basis so you don't fall behind. And so we'll model that out what that looks like.
And if you think back to the slide with the drinking water program funds, there's gonna be 3 separate loans in there, there's 3 separate awards. And the way their money works with the bond bank is your first payment is due a year after you close the loan. So you're probably 3 years away from closing that first loan, 4 years on the next one, 5 years on the, so you have a lot of opportunity in there to stagger that 41% projected rate.
Then there should be some bond retirements during that time as well, correct? Has that been looked at?
Yes.
That's a-
That's
Is that, that's already taken
April
into
25th.
consideration with the
Is
rate?
it, okay.
Here, you've got a couple that are coming up within that timeframe.
Are
So,
those calculated though in the necessity for the 41%?
The first one is the 2025 one, the
Yeah.
2028 one is not.
2028 is not, so that's significant. And we've already, Reggie already started doing the 1.5, we did 1.5 last year, we're looking at post 1.5 this year. So we're already trying to be proactive with reducing whatever that is gonna end up being.
So do we have any other capital projects coming up, like tank work or,
Yeah, we have
Pump
those,
work.
Sawyer Road Lining project starts in the spring.
and that, but we've already got that money, correct?
Yeah, I just don't know what the debt service is gonna be off of it. Right?
We've got the money, we haven't closed.
That's what I'm saying, so.
I'm sorry, you what?
We've been awarded the money, we have not closed the loan.
So you don't know what the interest rate's gonna be yet, so you don't have an amortization? It's not included in this,
it's not
correct?
included, not included.
So that's what I'm, and so we've
Yeah,
got that, we've
that's-
got that water main, and we must have other things that we're gonna end up borrowing for that was gonna be taken into consideration with us, right?
Oak Street.
Oak Street's
Oak
out
Street.
there.
Yeah, but for the city, or are you talking about for the water department?
For the water department,
Oak Street's not the water department, unless they're doing, oh, you're gonna replace the water main as part of it.
Yeah.
That's stormwater.
that's it, and then tanks and, I mean, do we have
Your
to?
tanks are all set.
The tanks are set.
Well, I'm sorry, existing tanks are all set, maybe, but there's still the discussion about whether or not there's a new tank for a new pressure gradient, and I don't know that decision has been made.
I guess one of the, once we finish the modeling, kind of figure out the amortization schedule and current, we're going to be revamping the infrastructure planning, which will include all these pieces too. You know, as we discussed in the last budget session, like, let's go forward with the 1.5% without PUC. You know, do we want to stagger up ahead of time looking into this, or just keep at, you know, to go above the PUC without having to go to them? Or do we want to start building up a little more so it's not, you know, all that debt service hits at once? We have to, you know, I think that's a question I'd like to discuss more. Maybe we don't have all the information for right now, but, or do we just keep staying at that 1.5% until this requires us to do more?
And
We'll
this takes
model
into
that.
consideration what the city pays for hydrants? Because we have made up some of that, some with taxpayer dollars. When you're looking at the,
Revenue?
so the city pays for hydrants, and that's outside of the rate?
Yeah, that's factored into the
That's factored into-
41%, yeah.
The terms of the loans generally are compared to the useful life of the 20 years?
I
You
guess
can do less, that's the max that they have.
It would be good to, when this all comes together, it's a $20 million project, just to look at the effect of the debt service with, like, what we know as capital projects in the next 10 years too, so that we know what we really are affecting.
And I think we need to put that in there as far as what that debt is. And I think we need to do some better modeling on what the growth might be, so we can really get a handle on what that percentage rate increase would be. If we, just some conservative assumptions as far as, if you've grown 20% over the last 4 years, maybe that's aggressive, but I think you're growing and using more water, and so we need to make some assumptions about what that looks like to see what that real rate increase might be.
Right.
Yeah, there were a lot of big projects this year. You know, the Beals Avenue, the 30, 40 units go there, the 150 units, the courthouse. Now that there's currently a courthouse here, but that'd still be a big expansion. The home to suites, there might be just a way we can kind of see some current growth, housing growth from this last year, and, see if that type of water usage as going forward, or is Jack's, that increase in Jack's, the main component of that. We could look at, some of those pieces.
Work on, we got more to do on finances as far as, any more questions on? Next steps. 2 more slides, just 2 more slides.
All right, so now we're going to talk about where we go from here. So this work has been done and sort of what's next. And so one of the things that we think is important is as we talk about these different treatment techniques that are different than what Reggie's familiar with now and what the city is familiar with, is looking at some or some local utilities that use the equipment that we're proposing, and talk to the operator, see how they like to operate it, and understand what goes with it. So this slide just shows some plants that use the different treatment techniques that we're talking about. So Maine Water Company just built a brand new plant for their Biddeford-Saco division. It's been on the news quite a bit, so I don't know if anybody has seen it, but it's an impressive facility. So that's utilizes the gravity filtration and plate settlers that we're talking about for Ellsworth. The UNH just built a new water treatment plant just a few years ago with, again, plate settlers and filtration. So both of those are relatively recent plants and can give some good insight into how those things work. And then there are also some that don't have the plate settler filtration, but do have, or plate settler clarification, but do have filtration. So the Ensign-Madison Water District, Maine Water Company in Skowhegan, and the Kittery Water District are just a couple of options there. So I think for anyone that's interested in seeing what some of these look like, that's a great next step, and we're happy to facilitate those. So sort of a timeline for next steps is we looked at the pilot clarification and filtration technologies, bringing that technology to the site and seeing how they operate over a period of time. We're envisioning that work starting in the spring. We really want to get that going as soon as we can so we can identify what this technology is and keep moving forward, because we know Reggie gets nervous with the plant the way it is now.
It is important that you confirm performance.
Correct, yeah. So we have a lot of ideas about how these are going to work and what the bench scale study tells us and what the water quality tells us, but before this type of investment is made, it's really important to just confirm those assumptions and confirm that performance. And it also helps us with things like sizing those lagoons and understanding how much residual we're going to be getting out of the process. So a lot of important data that comes out of that. Completing site investigation next year, so any additional survey or geotechnical information, wetlands mapping, anything we need to permit and construct and design the new facility. And then it's really, moving into that technology selection and starting design. So I believe that's all we had. Happy to take any questions.
Hey, go back to your slide, not the last one, but the one before it.
Sure.
Okay, filtration, Anson-Madison. Now, I know where Anson and Madison are, they're up above Skowhegan on the Kennebec. But
Yeah.
why, what's going on? How are they getting whatever they're doing to Richmond, which is down on the lower?
That might be a typo.
Okay, all right.
It's another water.
Yeah.
Good catch, right?
Good catch.
That's good, yeah.
That's a good catch. I'm geographically challenged, so it didn't mean anything to me, so. Interesting.
No. Not Kittery.
Does anyone else have any questions? In the audience? Interesting, this is always
Yeah, I have to
such
say,
cool
it's
stuff
super
to do.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
And it might be a little off topic, but maybe you could help me understand. The existing plant was built in 1990, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so approximately 35 years old. Is that the expected life of that plant? Did we do something wrong to shorten its life? Did we do something good to lengthen its life?
I'll take a stab
Okay.
at this one. So, I'd ask you to compare your new wastewater treatment plant on Bayside with the building, the water plant that's on Branch Lake. And the water plant that's on Branch Lake is a wood framed, a lot of drywall inside, so stick-built. Ventilation system sort of consists of, in a handful of rooms, there's a wall-mounted exhaust fan that are prone to failure. And so you kind of compare that to a masonry block structure with very robust HVAC systems providing adequate ventilation, heating, and cooling, and how a building can perform over time is very related to one versus the other. So, I mean, in layman's terms, the water plant was built a little bit on the cheap in 1990, let's be honest.
Could you say that again?
It was built a little bit on the cheap in 1990. Just the materials of construction, the building systems that went into it. And so I think you should reasonably expect to get more than 35 years out of a treatment plant building. Getting 35 years out of that building was probably pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's comparable to the wastewater. Right, the wastewater was built in, I think, 78,
Yeah, something like that.
somewhere in there. And it failed by, we built a new plant went online in 2012, but it took a few years to build. So really, you're talking about 2008 probably, it was at the end of its useful life. So that's 30 years, right? And so, now we have a new plant that's been online since 2012, it's in great shape. And so I think his point's valid, that the building materials matter, what you put inside the building matters. And, education, knowledge is a big piece of this, because when the Clean Water Act came out in 1972, people started building wastewater treatment plants everywhere. There was millions of dollars in grant money, like $50 million in grant money up there. And like the plant that was built for Ellsworth in 1970, whatever, was probably a poster child on how not to build a treatment plant. If you look at it, if you look back at it, at the time, they probably thought it was cutting edge. And so these years of knowledge have as this knowledge has been accumulated, designs have gotten better and better, technology has gotten better and better. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking probably 50 years is gonna be more of a reasonable expectation on both the wastewater and the water plant when it comes to any.
But even 50 years, it shouldn't be a complete replacement of the plant.
Right.
I think that what you have is, it's not redundant, so there's not a lot of redundancy in the water plant. It's not built very robustly. You've seen such growth that if you hadn't grown at all, maybe we wouldn't be sitting here talking about trying to replace it. I mean, your growth is pressing the limits about how you're running that, and it's hard to run.
Well, what you should understand is, they've said that it's, the design is 870,000 gallons a day.
Correct.
This summer, we ran 870,000 gallons a day.
So what I'm hearing is that we shouldn't be disappointed in the value or the life that we got out of the existing plant. Okay. And that was one question. The other question I had is and I realize this is a different topic, but is this plant more important than the infrastructure under the ground to deliver the water?
From a regulatory compliance standpoint, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so, you certainly, there are parts of town that still have 1888 in it. But they're very few, and fewer than it was just 15 years ago. So I think it's really limited to Oak Street, maybe at this point, 1882 maybe. So, you have some small pockets to get that really old cast iron pipe out of the ground, but from a regulatory compliance standpoint, meeting the disinfection byproduct rule, continuing to stay in compliance with lead and copper rule, it's really treatment where those things will happen.
Yeah, I should know, it's best in the THM system, like there's some of the pieces on the looping, you know, that if you could design it from scratch, there's no Ellsworth, you'd want to have all these things looping, continuous running.
Yeah, and part of the vision for Public Works too is that, you know, at some point we may be replacing water mains instead of paying somebody else to replace water mains. So, we're not capable of building a new water treatment plant, but I have a crew that's definitely capable of digging up the main and replacing it. We just haven't done it because that vision hasn't surfaced, but it's surfacing now, which is why we agreed to build a road. And if we can build that road, then we can certainly replace the water main. And we've already talked about some of them, some of the ones that we're going to look at doing after we figure out the little courthouse road thing. So,
You know, I should note Reggie and his team, you know, they're working every day on those plants and the pumps and those other pieces, and we're not just waiting necessarily for the new water treatment plant. Like, they're addressing the system. I think we just got a report on the THMs being much lower for the latest test. You know, we're testing even more often than that we still doing the required tests, of course, but we're trying to get much more up-to-date timing, doing a variety of kind of releases at certain hydrant areas and those areas that are more effective, and it's those non-looped portions. I know there's a website I think we have on our ellsworthmaine.gov specifically dedicated to water, this project, THMs, lots of information out there. So the teams are doing a lot to address these, but especially with this treatment plant, some of the the solids that are coming in there from Branch, I think the pipe that goes into Branch is going to go further out in this one, right? So there's some things like that.
Yeah, correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Will this be on the website? Okay.
Yeah,
I
well-
had a hard time seeing it, so.
I can't remember the website offhand, but we'll put it on that page as
Okay,
well,
so
and
it'd
in
be
addition to our website. Yep.
Good to have it available to the public.
And it's also recorded too, so you can look at it on YouTube too, Sam.
Oh, okay.
Is there anything we should update on this? I've got so we could add Oak Street or Surrey, we could add data anticipated proposed to that thing if you'd like, or?
Yeah, I would like to see in just what we have for capital plans, over the next 10 years at least. Because we must have an idea of what we're doing in the future with the different plans and where the need is in the whole system. We know how old our tanks are, our pumps are, all that stuff.
And then on the timeline, when do we expect to start construction? I know, or when do we expect to know when to expect to start construction, maybe?
I mean, not, sort of answers the question with a question. I mean, we're sort of ready to launch into design, to prepare construction documents. And so I think we need to have a conversation about when the city is ready to receive that proposal from
Yeah,
us.
that slide.
I mean, I think the answer to your question directly, we've told the drinking water program construction in 2025. And so, that's for laying out that slide about
Construction in 2026.
2026, well, more construction fronts in 2025. Construction commence in 2026?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So construction commence in 2026.
Yeah, so splitting off the lagoons and the intake from the main water plant, would you anticipate having to start those separately?
Yes, and we could start
That's
this.
what I thought. So we may be doing some lagoon work and stuff prior to actually building the water treatment.
Correct.
But I think we need to maybe take that into consideration because really that's when you're gonna wanna start thinking about funding and spending the money and budgeting. And so you may wanna break out a timeline that has an estimate on, say, the lagoon project with the intake and then an actual main plant project and when that might commence, because you got on here preliminary design was where's your preliminary design? I saw it, but I didn't see a date next to it.
Yeah, so we have the design basis report being wrapped up this fall, sort of the
Yeah.
hope, and so from there, we'd move right into preliminary design, so I would imagine that continues.
Right, what I'm saying is, number 4 is design basis report,
Yep.
October 25. Number 5 is construction schedule and cost estimate, anticipated 2025. But after that, you still have to go through,
Detailed design.
Correct.
yeah, the full design, the bid process, getting a contractor, approving all the funding, and then making everything work. So, I mean, if you're talking 2026, it's probably gonna be later in 2026. I don't think it's gonna be early.
So is everything approved and the funding approved for what you need to do next with what you would put on your other slide? What's next is,
No.
continuing testing. You've used all the 300,000 now?
Correct, yeah.
So you can't really go ahead until and I know this is a dumb question and I should know this, but have we've approved the loans and accepting all of the money so far?
I don't think you've accepted the most recent one that they just gave, but you will.
Yeah, they have not sent you their commitment letter yet.
Oh, okay.
You're waiting. So the primary project list was just published last week, maybe the week before.
Yeah, 2 weeks
So
ago.
there's a lot of conversations that we have with them about timing and who's ready to receive the money. They want to produce a list that they know people want that money.
Okay.
So we've had those conversations, but you should be, the city should be receiving soon the commitment letter that
Okay.
defines those terms.
So are the next steps accepting the next round of funding? Everything else is funded except for that, right? So the other page for that's all
Yes.
accepted? So is the next thing then just getting a proposal for you for the next phase that we already have money for?
Yes.
And then picking a construction date and moving forward.
So, I mean, I guess the question like Michelle is talking about is, in this upcoming budget process that we're about to go through, should we be allocating money for any kind of matches or anything like that?
And debt service?
Right.
I would say no for the next fiscal year because,
Because we have a year of,
yeah.
before we're gonna
Just wanna
start.
make sure, Because,
Well, if we start using that money, aren't we gonna,
You're going to need interim finance.
We've done, so the two pieces, if you go to the other
Right.
slide, those two pieces are construction dollars.
those?
Those are construction dollars.
Oh, because it says preliminary final design.
Well, it's, based on what we talked about the other day, those will be construction dollars. And so they'll only be applied to construction, and so there's no sense of urgency to start using those for 3 years.
So then we will need to approve a ban or preliminary funding? Or are we going to be using some of this money that's grant loan?
So the drinking water program really encourages utilities to obtain interim financing from the bond bank. So I don't know that you have to get a ban when you finance with the bond bank interim.
Well, you gotta, yeah, I mean, if it's interim financing, it's a ban. It has to be.
And then they only go out to twice a year,
No.
November and May.
But then
So
you,
you'd
and
have
then
to use that.
you immediately have debt service that we've
Yeah.
gotta pay for if we do interim financing.
The only thing in question is like when you're doing all on this page is all that, the main bond bank will fund as part of the drinking water program. So they will fund all your interim financing as part of the drinking water program. The only thing that's a little bit questioned is on the other slide, the match piece is the only thing that might come under the, having to go out for a separate ban to do that. That's the only thing that 1.5 million of match, we haven't quite figured out exactly how that comes about yet. So that's the only thing that might be something you have to go out. It's about federal money versus your money, it's that whole complexity. These two are federal programs, so you can't use any federal money,
Yeah,
or you can't use any federal money to match it, and you can't use any of the drinking water program because BABA comes into play. And so that $1.5 million, Michelle, is the one piece that you might have to.
that we might have to do. But if you're saying, but I guess I'm coming back, we gotta pay you or something? So if we do interim financing, right? That's not free.
Out of the drinking water program, we don't finance it.
You say we can just draw down from.
Draw down.
You draw down that, but if we, so that, I'm back to my question then. If we start drawing it down, do we have to start paying the interest on it?
After you close it.
Not until you close it. So they'll draw it down for free? No interest, no nothing?
Oh, no, you have interest. But it's all-
There we go.
1.5 It's all the same, it's 1.5%, it's all.
So, okay.
It's rolled into the whole program.
So we'll have to budget for that interest?
Drawn, yeah, it's all
All right.
budgeted, the payment of the interest is all budgeted for the numbers we've shown. And so you take out the first $6 million, you take out the first $6 million, as money you have available to start to pay us, to pay the piloting program, all that kind of stuff would come out of that.
Right, but that means though, we still have to budget the interest, even though,
Yes.
okay.
Yes,
That's what I was asking for
Right, right.
25 next budget.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can draw it on.
No, I don't think
And
it's,
interest is in the total.
It's in the
project.
total budget, it's not outside of this project. So that $19 million has a budgeted amount for the interest you're paying during interim financing, it's all, it's not above and beyond.
No, but the question is, when do we have to budget the interest?
yeah, to pay for the sub, I think there's
Yeah.
a, we'll dial in those numbers, we'll get kind of
I
a,
know it's part of the money, but we still have to budget
Yes.
how we're gonna pay for it, because we're not paying for interest with money that we're borrowing. Right?
Many do.
Well, that's expensive. Well, 1.5%, maybe it's not. We'll have to look at that.
yeah, that's, and I think let's get that time frame when we actually expect to do this, how the money's gonna have to go out to you all, how it gets drawn down, which fiscal cycle we'll need to start paying some of this debt service, so we can have some, I think at the next council meeting, have a little bit more definitive
Yeah.
answers, in addition to the,
Yeah, if you're gonna, we probably should come back in February to get this started then, if they're out of money. We can't go any further without it. But we just would need that information.
We've also, like, you know, we actually did a drawdown schedule that we had to supply to the drinking water program, because they were saying, okay, we're giving you this, we'll give you $6 million, we'll give you $6 million more, we'll give you the balance, but like, when will you be needing the money? So in that drawdown schedule also talks about the interest that's accrued. So we've already
Okay.
done a complete 3-year drawdown schedule of when you'll need money and how much, so we can give that to you.
That would be perfect.
Yeah.
That would be great.
and I think that in some ways goes to if this is gonna be above that 1.5% with PUC, and, you know, obviously this is on the, you know, the ratepayer side of things too, so we have to budget for it, but then, how do we stagger it in so we're not getting to that bigger one, all at one time, and, you know, we gotta factor all those things in here.
And that we don't dead end at this project.
Are
Yeah.
these separate packages? So, or can we borrow, we do interim financing through the entire construction process? Or do you have to, when you use up the first set of funds, do you have to close on that particular? Oh, so you can't just group them all together. So you
Drinking
could
water.
definitely have staggered years for
They're treated as like
interest.
3 separate awards.
Yeah,
So it would be 3
okay.
separate loans.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
So
we'll,
it seems like we need to do some work on this before we allow you to put it on the website, right?
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes.
And, yeah, a big asterisk on the 41%.
Yeah.
Oh, man, a little more details on that, I don't wanna,
Yes.
yeah, make it seem as though, hey, there's a 41% bill coming to you increase, like, that's not, it's definitely gonna be lower than
Yeah, it's 41%
that.
for this project, and then another 10% for this project, and, yeah, it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd rather be able to give people a.
Unfortunately, we didn't hit save in time, so some of those numbers didn't come through that we were talking about way over here. But, you know, we'll make sure the numbers are in the right context, because it's about $150 a year to the average. That's the
150
That's
is
based
the,
on-
that percent,
Current
that first, on
usage.
that day
It's
one
minimum.
percentage, that is Brent was saying.
But you're
Goes
not-
down as water sales go up, but that's the day one.
That's what I'm saying, but you're not accounting for the fact that if we do the 1.5% every year for the next 4 or 5 years till that first,
It eats at the 41%.
that's what I'm saying,
Yeah.
so that's not capturing that 41%.
Yep.
So even on the face of it right now, the 41% is a bad number because we're doing, and as long as the council approves the 1.5%, we're doing a 1.5% increase each year to get ready for it.
yeah, the, we'll work on those numbers, I think broadly though, really excited about this project because that plus the wastewater, two huge pieces of the Ellsworth water wastewater system that are, you know, in top-notch shape, as top-notch as you can get it. And I think another big selling point for Ellsworth is, you know, very much in a position to have, you know, and no
And we have to do it. I mean,
PFAS, yeah.
No,
It's
you're-
not a choice.
you're- It makes me nervous that it's that far out for the construction, because like I said, this summer, we pumped 870,000 gallons. You couldn't get any more out of it. So you got 150 units coming in and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
Makes me nervous.
See you guys in February.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it.
Someone else have questions?
Anybody else?
Oh, okay.
Super interesting.
Michelle, I have one thing
Yes.
for you.
There's